You are listening to Lesson 4, Chapter 1 of Form 5 African History. Cameroon General Education. Narrated by Wacheseh Academy. The problem of establishing a workable system of government. The establishment of one-party system in Africa. Most African states achieved independence in the 1960s adopting multi-party politics. However, by the 1970s most had adopted one-party system and subsequently returned to multi-party in the 1960s. General reasons for the adoption of the party system: to eliminate rivals or parties in the country, to increase the influence and authority of the leaders, to promote national faster, to end profitless political warfare regarding development, to make better use of the human resources in nation building, to reduce victimization of opponents in the civil service. The small parties found it very difficult to take part in national elections, to prevent threats of secession or civil wars, since most of the parties were regional. The irresponsible behavior of opposition parties, carrying out destructive criticisms, influenced the adoption of a one-party system. Foreign interference, supporting opposition parties with arms to destabilize ruling parties, influenced its adoption. African tradition was in favor of a single party, especially the rule of the chiefs before independence. The merits of the single-party system in Africa. It helped in the promotion of national integration. It reduced favoritism and victimization in the civil service, since all the people belonged to the same party. It prevented the waste of financial resources through intensive campaigns. It made available human resources for nation building. It facilitated the establishment of a unitary state, which reduced the chances of secession. It ended profitless political warfare, especially between parties. It contributed to peace and political stability, especially in countries with so many tribes. It gave room for quick decisions taken since there was no opposition. The demerits of the one-party system. It led to the dictatorship of the leader, who became power-drunk or despotic. There was no clear distinction between the state and the party. It allowed for limited choice because only candidates presented by the party could be voted. It led to inefficiency because of limited competition. Those who opposed the system were also victimized. It limited civil liberties such as freedom of speech, press, movement, etc. It influenced political interference in the economy because of no difference between the economy and the state. It always attracted military coups or popular uprising, leading to the loss of lives, since that was the only means available to change the leader. It encouraged the oppression of citizens because of the absence of opposition as a watchdog. It encouraged incompetence and corruption because party barons enjoyed state protection. The one-party system in Tanzania. Achievement of socialism under Julius Nyerere. He adopted a socialist-oriented society after the Arusha Declaration of 1967. He promoted the culture of self-reliance to fight against poverty. The policy discouraged foreign loans and imports to solve Tanzania's economic problems. He promoted socialist villages through the policy of villagization. The government set up many Ujamaa villages, which encouraged the cooperation of peasants, workers, and government in production. The government provided tools, machines, seeds, fertilizer loans, etc. to the farmers, and agricultural production increased in the villages in the 1960s, reducing poverty. The government established local industries in the villages such as cotton mills, coffee mills, which helped to process the peasants' crops. Provision of social amenities in the village such as clinics, schools, water, electricity, etc., which discouraged the rural exodus. The living standards of the peasants in the villages became one of the highest in Black Africa. By providing the peasants with jobs and social facilities in the villages, the gap between the rich and poor people reduced. Moral code was introduced in the society. Civil servants, parliamentarians, ministers, etc. were compelled to live a simple and modest life and avoid luxurious cars, drinks, clothes, shoes, houses, etc. Bribery and corruption, which were common in most African states, were rare in Tanzania. The ruling party, TANU, was very transparent, open to alternative policies, different ideas, etc. Problems. Fluctuating prices of agricultural products made government planning very difficult. Hostility from the Western powers. They were reluctant to support Nyerere socialism. The Western powers were reluctant to buy Tanzania's agricultural produce at a good price. Most of the peasants were very conservative and slow to readjust to the communal projects. Not easy to wipe out corruption. Failure. Failed to reduce the gap between the rich and poor. Failure to survive using only domestic resources because had to go for loans. Failed to make the villages self-sufficient by 1980. They faced scarcity of basic products. Failed to check rural exodus, which was manifested in the late 1970s because of the scarcity of basic products in the villages. Reasons why African states returned to multi-party in the 1990s. Internal factors. The level of education and awareness of people increased in the 1990s. They became more mature democratically. Internal pressure mounted by the religious organizations for multi-party in order to vote out immoral politicians. Internal pressure mounted by the human rights movement, who wanted a change of leadership that would guarantee freedom of speech, press movement, debates in parliament, etc. The refusal of leaders to step down despite mediocre performance under a one-party system. The one-party system failed to provide transparency. It rather promoted corruption, tribalism, and nepotism. The one-party system had weakened the powers of the judicial to guarantee social justice, because judges openly militated in the ruling party. To put an end to despotic rule, inefficient leaders. The one-party system had failed to promote prosperity, because the party officials were tied to the economy who were not productive. Pressure from the elite, who wanted alternative parties for their views to be listened to or heard. External. The collapse of the one-party communist dictatorship revolution, against a similar one-party dictatorship in Africa. Internal pressure mounted by international financial institutions such as IMF, IBRD, as a precondition for aid. Pressure from international organizations such as Francophonie for the adoption of multiparty as a precondition for financial and technical assistance. Pressure from African intellectuals abroad who provided moral and material aid for pro-democracy demonstrations. Pressure mounted by the Western industrialized nations such as Britain, France, the USA for the adoption of multiparty or face suspension of aid.